In a small town, honor isn't something you earn, it's something you are given. To our town, I was a hero, an icon. John, 35 years in the fire department. I pulled children from flames and saved the elderly from floods. Every time I put on the uniform, I felt the weight of their faith. It was pure, unadulterated pride.
And then there was my son, Henry. Henry is my greatest pride. He built a successful construction company and is now running for mayor. He has everything: a flawless reputation, intelligence, and, most importantly, he is the son of John, the hero. I knew he would win. I could retire peacefully, knowing my legacy was in safe hands.
But every legacy is just a beautiful facade, and underneath every facade, there is a crack. Ours started 25 years ago, on the coldest December night. It was the fire that destroyed Richard Thompson's Craft Center, an old historic building in the heart of the city. The losses were immense. I was the chief. I led the investigation.
It was the hardest case of my career, until I learned the truth. Not the truth I told the town, but the one I buried deep beneath the ashes. I found my 17-year-old son, Henry, near the scene. He was in shock. He confessed. He threw an unextinguished firework into what he thought was an empty dumpster. The fire spread instantly. A teenager's carelessness that could have destroyed his entire future? That evening, Richard Thompson, the owner, came to me, strangely calm. He looked me in the eye and said, "I saw your Henry nearby, but I also know my center was only bringing me debt. It was insured for $2 million. It wasn't blackmail. It was a proposition. Richard offered to stay silent about my son if I, as fire chief, wrote the report. Cause of fire, faulty wiring. This would get him the insurance money and save my son from prosecution. I was a hero, but I became a criminal. We were both accomplices. 25 years later, Richard decided it was time to cash in on my legacy. I thought fear was standing inside a burning building. I was wrong. True fear is standing on your perfectly manicured lawn, watching your son build his future and realizing you have no control over the past. My entire life was built on Richard's belief in my lie, and he decided now was the most expensive moment to collect.
I received a package. Inside wasn't a threatening note, just 2 photographs. The first, me, the young fire chief, signing the faulty wiring report. The second, a blurred yet recognizable silhouette of Henry, standing on the street corner that night, 25 years ago.
An hour later, Richard called. He was perfectly calm. "Henry can be mayor, John, but first he needs to pay the old debt of our friendship." Richard wasn't asking for millions. He demanded $250,000 in cash. Deadline, 48 hours before Henry's final debate.
If the money wasn't delivered, he would send the photos and his detailed confession to the police, and worse, to the press. I couldn't go to the bank. I couldn't sell assets. It would raise questions. $250,000 would wipe out my savings, but Richard knew that was the price I was willing to pay for my son's reputation.
My son Henry was euphoric. He was at the peak of his popularity. His campaign was built on honesty and revitalizing our town after crisis. The irony burned me. I looked at his billboards, seeing his perfect smile, and realized every one of his victories only increased my burden. I went to the site of the old craft center. It was now a square dedicated to our town's resilience. There, I met an old friend, Tom, a former firefighter.
Tom was one of the few who never believed the wiring conclusion.
Tom told me how profound the real consequences of the fire were. Yes, the material damage was insured, but the center housed the town's only school for children with special needs. They had to close for 2 years. 2 children suffered serious regression due to the interruption in therapy.
The fire that saved my son had broken the lives of 2 families. This was the blow I had ignored for 25 years. I saved my son from disgrace, but at the cost of real, physical suffering I covered up so Richard could get his insurance payout. I saved my son, but became an accomplice to a double crime, covering up negligence and aiding insurance fraud. I returned home, clutching my phone. I had to find the money. My wife, seeing my panic, asked, "What is it, John? Is it Richard? He already got his payout, didn't he?"
I couldn't answer. I realized she knew about the deal, but not about Henry's guilt. I was ready to pay for my son's future. I was a hero, now secretly paying for my past.
There was no time. 48 hours until Henry's debate. I was ready to empty my retirement accounts. The irony burned. I, who spent my life saving others' property, now had to secretly cash out my own savings to protect my son from the disgrace he earned. I went to my banker, an old friend, requesting an urgent withdrawal. He looked at me suspiciously. "John, this is your retirement. What happened? You can't just pull out $250,000 in cash." I explained it was for an urgent private investment. The lie was as simple and slick as it was 25 years ago. I managed to raise about $180,000. I was short $70K. I couldn't withdraw more without raising alarms. Then Henry appeared. He came to me, beaming with confidence. "Dad, I know you're stressed about the election. I want to help. I see you're worried about money. I transferred $100K from my company account."
You know I like surprises. That's our victory fund. I was stunned. My son, the cause of all my problems, was giving me the money to solve them. But where did he get $100K so easily? I knew his construction company was under scrutiny, and sudden transfers looked suspicious. Henry, trying to save his future image as mayor, was unknowingly digging me into an even deeper financial hole. If the feds investigated, Henry's money could be linked to the blackmail. I took the money. I was too panicked to refuse. With the necessary sum, I drove to the rendezvous, an old, abandoned parking lot outside town. Richard Thompson was waiting in his new, expensive SUV. The man who burned his failing business was living on insurance and blackmail. I threw the bag onto his passenger seat. "Here's your $250,000. This is the last time we speak. The lie is over."
Richard didn't take the bag immediately. He gave me the same lazy smile I remembered from that night. "The lie never ends, John. It just gets more expensive." He took out a small, old voice recorder and played it. It was our conversation from 25 years ago. My voice. "I'll sign the wiring report, but you stay quiet about Henry." Richard's voice. "Consider Henry was never there, Chief."
Richard was blackmailing me not only with the past, but with proof of our conspiracy. If I turned him into the police, he'd release that recording. I would be exposed not just as a father who covered up, but as a corrupt fire chief who colluded in insurance fraud. I felt physical pain. Richard turned off the recorder. "I want you to resign, John, right now, and Henry will withdraw his candidacy, and this $250K is just an advance." He didn't want the money. He wanted control. He wanted revenge for me firing his uncle from the city administration years ago.
I realized Henry, as mayor, would be Richard's target for years. Withdrawing from the election was his way of destroying my legacy without involving the police. I looked at the bag of cash. It was my last chance. With that money, I could anonymously send it to the victims fund, start my redemption. But I used it to buy silence.
I grabbed the bag back. I won't give you a cent, Richard. And my son is not dropping out. You can tell them whatever you want. I left him in the parking lot, knowing the war would start tomorrow.
The war started exactly at 7 a.m. I was having breakfast when my phone exploded. Richard Thompson made good on his threat, but he did it smartly. He didn't publish the recording of our deal. He only published the photos of Henry at the fire scene 25 years ago with an anonymous testimony of negligence covered up by the fire chief.
The headlines were catastrophic. Hero's son behind Kraft Center fire? Former fire chief covered up son's guilt? Henry's campaign stopped instantly. The election was 48 hours away, and his reputation was torn to shreds. Henry burst in, not upset, but furious. "Dad, what is this? Why are you letting him lie? He wants to destroy me."
Henry sincerely believed Richard was lying. He remembered only his fear that night, but his mind, protecting itself, had erased his guilt. It was time to open his eyes. I looked at my son, his perfect suit, and his almost ruined future as mayor. Richard isn't lying, Henry. You were there. You threw the firework. You started that fire.
Henry's face turned to ash, denial, shock, then anger. He couldn't believe his perfect hero father had let him live a lie to cover up his fault. You knew? You knew for 25 years and let me build my life on this? He wasn't angry at Richard. He was angry at me. I explained the whole deal, the insurance, Richard's role, and my false wiring report. Henry, the natural businessman, immediately understood. Then we must say that Richard is a fraud, and you just played along to get his testimony. That saves both of us. But saving Henry meant another lie. A lie that would erase what I learned from Tom about the two children whose lives were damaged because of our combined double deception. I couldn't do it. I was left alone while the entire town waited for my answer. I could save my son by accusing Richard of fraud, which was true, but continue to cover up Henry's negligence. Or I could tell the whole truth, destroying Henry and myself, but restoring honor. I made my decision. I called one of the most respected town foundations and transferred $250,000, the same money I withdrew for the blackmailer. I knew that money wouldn't give those children back their 2 years, but it was the first step toward atonement. On election day, Henry didn't withdraw. He waited for my public statement. I didn't go to the polling place. I went to the site of the old Kraft Center. I called the media and asked them to gather there. Standing before the square dedicated to resilience, I spoke. I admitted my lie. I confessed that 25 years ago I covered up my son's carelessness to protect him from shame. I admitted colluding with Richard Thompson for his insurance payout and issuing a false report. I sacrificed my honor to preserve my son's honor. But it was not honor. It was a lie, I said. In that moment, I didn't hear the press shouting. I didn't think of Henry, who lost the election. I thought of the two children who could now get help. I stopped being a hero and finally stopped being an accomplice. The fire was out. My public confession caused an earthquake. My reputation, which seemed unbreakable, crumbled to dust. I wasn't jailed. The statute of limitations on Henry's negligence had expired, and my part in the conspiracy was ruled an act under duress and self-sacrifice. But I lost everything. I was stripped of my pension, my title, and the town's faith.
Richard Thompson, thanks to my testimony, was arrested for insurance fraud. I was cleared of suspicion, but in the town's eyes, I remained a hero who turned out to be a liar. The most painful part was the separation from my son. Henry lost the election. His political career was permanently finished.
He couldn't forgive me for first letting him live a lie and then publicly destroying him. Our last meeting was cold. "You didn't take my shot at mayor, Dad. You took my story," he said, and left. My wife stayed with me, but our marriage became quiet, like ash. She said, "You chose the truth, John, but that truth took us from you."
I live in a small house outside town. My life is simplified. I volunteer for a small foundation that helps special needs children. The fund where I transferred the $250,000. They don't know who I am, but they accept my help. I met the mother of one of the children whose school closed 25 years ago. She didn't know my name, but she said, "Our fund finally expanded thanks to an anonymous large donation. I believe when someone makes a mistake, they're given a chance to fix it. That's what redemption looks like."
My dilemma wasn't about saving my son, but saving the lie. That lie carried a double crime: Richard's fraud and my guilt. To end it, I had to destroy everything. Men, if you were in my place, knowing your silence protects your candidate's son, would you make a public confession and destroy his career? Or pay the blackmailer and let your son become mayor? What would be your price? Discuss below.
This story is about how a lie sealed in a deal always returns to take what is most precious. If you value stories about heavy moral choices and the price of honor, please hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories about men fighting for their truth. Thank you for your support.
I never regained the title of hero, but I restored my honor, which I traded for silence. I finally understood that true honor is not what you wear, but what you pay. I paid.